thousands walked out this morning for 48 hours in a dispute over pay. NHS bosses are warning there will be severe disruption.
Outrageous. It's not just the senior doctors. Many of you might have had your travel disrupted today due to rail staff striking and the long-running dispute over pay and jobs conditions. Is your patience wearing thin with all of these strikes? Mine is.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Farage versus Coutts row rumbles on. The Prime Minister had his say yesterday, stating that no one should have their bank account closed because of their political views. We're going to have Nigel on the show this morning to tell us what's been happening.
So stay tuned for that. Later in the show, we're also going to discuss new research that shows Britain spend less time in the office than anywhere else in Europe. Have you heard of the civil service? People become a bit lazy, or is working from home the future?
I don't think it's just the civil service, but if you are working from home and it works for you, let us know. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email, or if you're a boss and you are absolutely tired of people not being in the office, let us know as well.
Nigel will have strong views on that, of course.
I'm sure he will. Now, first of all, though, here is the very latest news with Aaron Armstrong.
Good morning, it's 9:30. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. Voting has started in the 3 by-elections taking place in England today. All 3 seats in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, Selby and Ainsty, and Somerton and Frome have been held by the Conservatives since the last general election in 2019. Polling stations close at 10 o'clock. Constituents are being reminded to bring photo ID with them. Thousands of medical appointments and operations have been postponed as senior doctors hold a 48-hour strike over pay. Consultants and dentists have agreed to offer emergency care only as they walk out for the first time in a decade. It comes just 2 days after junior doctors staged a 5-day strike, the longest in the history of the NHS. Health Secretary Steve Barclay says the government have listened to the BMA's demands.
Average NHS earnings of a consultant after this pay rise will be £134,000 a year, and on top of that 20% of their salary goes into their pension, which means they'll be able to earn when they retire by the age of 65 tax-free up to £60,000 a year. The number one ask of the BMA was for pension tax reform, and we listened to that ask, we acted on it, and in addition we've also accepted in full the Independent Pay Review Body recommendations.
And rail passengers are facing further disruption this morning as RMT members launch fresh strikes. It's the first of 3 days of industrial action affecting 14 train companies in England, and it may have a knock-on effect into Scotland and Wales too. In some areas, only half of train services will run. Other areas have no services at all. That's it for the moment. So we'll have more throughout the morning and afternoon. Our website has more too, gbnews.com. Now, back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning. It's 9:33. Thank you for joining us on GB News. Now, thousands of senior doctors in England will go on strike today over pay disputes, causing major disruption across the NHS.
So this is consultants and dentists now are staging a 48-hour walkout. Consultants, remember, average pay £128,000 a year, plus pension. It threatens to bring all sorts of procedures to a standstill.
So let's go now to GB News' South West of England reporter Jeff Moody. Good morning, Jeff. Where are you and what is the mood like there?
I'm here at the Royal Infirmary in Bristol. The picket line is just beginning to form. They began their strike at 7 o'clock this morning, and it's going to be for 48 hours. Now, this one is being said to be extremely significant, extremely disruptive, because it is consultants. It's also hospital dentists, but it's the consultants that's really causing the problem, because not an awful lot can be achieved in a hospital without consultants, particularly the junior doctors, who rely very heavily on consultants. So this really is bringing the NHS to a standstill. They're saying that cover is going to be a Christmas Day type cover. In other words, just emergency care and a few routine appointments, but very few. Most people have had their operations cancelled today, their appointments cancelled today. The NHS England says it really isn't fair that this strike should happen hot off the heels of the junior doctors' strike. because they haven't had chance to regroup, restaff, reorganise rotas before being plunged into yet another crisis. So they're saying it's very unfair from the consultants to do this right now. And patients, of course, are saying, look, you know, we're really suffering at the moment. We're suffering on all fronts, cost of living crisis, etc., etc. And now we're finding that even our routine appointments are cancelled. So word on the street now is that people are pretty tired of this altogether. But the consultants themselves say that they are angry and that they've now hit rock bottom.
OK, thank you, Jeff. Jeff Moody, there, our South West of England reporter. Joining us now is Dr Lawrence Buckman, former chairman of the British Medical Association's General Practitioners Committee. Good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. Who needs to budge here, Dr Buckman? How are we going to find any sort of solution?
Both sides have to go back into a room with each other and talk. Deals are never done by either side shouting across a wall. You have to go through and to find what it is that you need to do a deal. Deals are there to be done, and I'm disappointed that the two sides are not in the same place now.
Dr Buckman, a lot of people watching and listening to this programme will be horrified that people earning around £128,000 a year are going on strike, and they could well be, instead of working in the NHS, working in the private sector, earning even more money.
Well, that's an interesting observation because, of course, a large number of consultants already work in the private sector, and the exodus from the NHS amongst all grades of staff is going up and up and up, and the number of people coming into the NHS is going down. And I'm sad to say that consultants can walk, whether abroad or into the private sector, and it wouldn't suit us if we all went private, because there's still not enough medical humans in the Great Britain to be able to deliver care for patients. The NHS is broken, and it's going to be very difficult to make it work, and the consultants are fed up. You're looking at one of the most conservative parts of the NHS workforce. There aren't many consultants who would see this as a political crusade. They're there to try and make the NHS work, and you don't compare their pay with anybody else's pay. I've never earned the kind of money they're likely to earn, and I don't begrudge it to them for a second.
Yeah, but you say they're the most conservative, but they are also the best paid, and I repeat again, Dr Buckman, £128,000 a year, plus the pension they get on top, plus they're often working in the private sector on other days in the week. There's going to be very little public sympathy for what they're doing today.
I think you reach a point where you stop worrying about public sympathy, and I think the consultants and the juniors, I think, have got to that point. When you're desperate, when you feel the NHS is crumbling around your ears, you start to feel that actually I would like the general public to come with me, but if they don't, well, OK. And I think the consultants are now so desperate, and the juniors too, in a completely different way, that I think they can't see that they really have got to get round the table with the political centre to try and get some movement.
Is it entirely about pay? Is their complaints just purely about pay? Because we think of these being the compassionate occupations. I mean, you're saying then that the doctors get to a point where what you're effectively saying is their compassion has abated for their patients, and they are no longer susceptible to any sort of outside feeling from the public. And that sounds like a mindset that I don't ordinarily associate with doctors.
No, most of us went into the business to care, not to get rich. I mean, they're welcome to their pay, but it's not about pay. Of course, the headline that you're broadcasting is about pay, but there's much more to it than that. The level of discontent within the health service is the worst it has ever been. I've been saying that for 20 years. And of course, for 20 years, every week has been the worst it's ever been. And now it's reached a point where people almost don't care. They care about their patients, so the patient in front of them matters as much as it ever did. But they can't do the things they want to do for that patient in the room with them. And as for the wider public, I think they've reached a point of no return now. And if you say you've not seen that before, I think many of your viewers and listeners would be very worried to find that the doctors and nurses now almost care more about keeping the health service going in some way than they do about how it will look if they strike. That's a very dangerous point to reach.
They can't care that much about their patients, can they, Doctor, if they're going on strike?
No, they care about the one in the room. I always care about the patient who's with me, much more than the broader brush of general practice. And the same applies to hospital doctors. They don't see it as their responsibility to worry about patients in the wider context because they believe that the health service needs so much of a shake-up, and it's not going to happen, I don't think. And it's probably too late now. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Former chairman of the BMA's GPs committee, Dr. Lawrence Bookman there.
Very frank.
Very frank. Yeah, he was. He said we just the doctors are, they've hit a wall really, saying they don't care anymore. They need changes.
And they don't feel they need to take the public with them. Because I don't think the public is with them on a strike where they are earning £128,000 a year plus pension.
That's right. But if you or any of your loved ones have had treatment postponed this week, do let us know, won't you? gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. OK, so the head of the NatWest Group is under fire this morning after multiple MPs, including the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, criticised the banking company's handling of the Nigel Farage debanking scandal. Debanking is the new word of the week, isn't it?
We talked here yesterday, Bev. I said, will Rishi Sunak raise this at Prime's questions? Actually, Rishi Sunak said the government would be cracking down on banks cancelling customers. This is what he had to say yesterday.
It wouldn't be right if financial services were being denied to anyone exercising their right to lawful free speech. Our new Financial Services and Markets Act puts in place new measures to ensure that politically exposed persons are being treated in an appropriate and proportionate manner. And having consulted on the payment services regulations, we are in the process of cracking down on this practice by tightening the rules around account closures. But in the meantime, any individual can complain to the Financial Ombudsman Service, which has the power to direct a bank to reopen their account.
Well, quite interesting that he didn't mention Nigel Farage by name because he couldn't bring himself to, but David Davis certainly did from the backbenches. Now, in response, Coutts Bank, because it is them, Coutts Bank, the Queen's Bank, the King's Bank, said it is not Coutts' policy to close customer accounts solely on the basis of legally held political and personal views.
They said decisions to close an account are not taken lightly and involve a number of factors, including commercial viability, reputational considerations, that's the important one, I think, and legal and regulatory requirements.
Absolute hogwash. Olivia Utley's our political reporter. Olivia, this has really it's caused a quote-unquote cliché political storm, and it's united all sorts of people.
Well, absolutely, and it does seem to get murkier and murkier the more you look into it. There is now... Nigel Farage has got his hands on the dossier that Coutts presented as its reason for debanking him.
Yeah.
And in that dossier, it makes completely clear, it says in plain English that Nigel Farage was a commercially viable customer. So why did they choose to not let him back with him? It does seem to be down to these reputational concerns. And what it sounds like is as though Coutts is using the rules around PEP, politically exposed persons, to essentially get rid of people who they don't really like. And it could be that there are legal concerns here as well, because one of the reasons cited in that 40-page dossier for removing Nigel Farage from the Coutts books is that he retweeted a Ricky Gervais tweet making a transgender joke. And Coutts said that that demonstrates transphobia. Well, under the Equalities Act, you are not allowed to discriminate against someone for gender-critical beliefs. So could there be a legal issue there? Either way, it is not a good look.
Ricky Gervais is one of the most popular comedians. And he has lit the touch a firestorm here now, hasn't he, Nigel Farage? I mean, they've really picked the wrong person. But the problem, I think, as well, Olivia, they lied, Coutts Bank. In their defence, which the BBC took, hook, line and sinker, the BBC political editor Simon Jack, and the FT.
Well, this is a massive problem for Coutts as well. I mean, you could argue that, you know, you are a bank, you can choose who you want to bank with you or not, but then lying about it massively compounds the issue. And now what's come out, and it was in the Telegraph this morning, is that the night before the BBC published its story that is claiming that Nigel Farage was only removed from Coutts's roster because he didn't meet the financial eligibility criteria, something which we now have proof is not not true. He was a commercially viable customer. The night before that story was published by Simon Jack on the BBC website, Simon Jack was sitting next to the CEO of Coutts Bank, Alison Rose, at a glitzy charity BBC dinner. So
when he said a senior source, because I remember that story, said a senior source.
It was a pretty senior source.
Couldn't have been more senior. It was the chief executive of the bank.
At the moment, both the BBC and Coutts are refusing to comment on this, but, you know, it's hard not to put two and two together and think that perhaps there was some sort of conversation that took place there.
So this is the chief executive of this bank, let's be honest here, got the BBC to lie.
I mean...
And the BBC fell for it.
On the face of it, that's what it looks like. I mean, maybe more will come out when they decide that they're willing to comment on this. But the BBC did publish that story after Simon Jack had sat next to Alison Rose. And when you read the dossier, it is completely clear that it's just simply not true that Nigel Farage was turned away for financial reasons. He admits, Nigel Farage, that his cash in his savings account fell below the £3 million required by Coutts. But according to all the evidence that we've seen, that happens all the time. And Coutts has never made a fuss about it before. So it is pretty sinister. And the government is now getting quite serious about it. We saw Rishi Sunak talking about it in PMQs yesterday. They're talking about drawing up laws sort of as soon as today, starting the process of drawing up laws to crack down on banks excluding people because of their political beliefs. But it'll take quite a long time, and I expect we really haven't heard the end of this.
We're not Russia. You know, we're not China, because that's what it feels like. It is so sinister.
What's quite interesting as well about it is the Telegraph have got a list of previous Coutts customers, and they include the head of the mafia in the 2000s, who was responsible for the deaths of 3,000 people or something. So he doesn't seem to be too far for Coutts, but Nigel Farage is.
Because of Brexit.
So what the brilliant thing that Nigel has done he's shone a light on the fact that we are edging closer and closer to being Russia and China in terms of how some of these corporations respond. Somebody that we have on this show quite a lot is a woman called Molly Kingsley, who set up the campaign group Us for Them, all about defending children's rights. And she's tweeted this morning to say, for anyone who thinks the debanking of Nigel Farage is purely about a narrow focus on right-wing politicians, our experience suggests otherwise. We've been a campaigning group for children's interests. We were debanked by PayPal in September 2022 without notice or explanation. Like Farage, there's no way we are a PEP, a politically exposed person. So this was plainly an ideologically motivated attack because our views didn't align with PayPal. But she says, she makes a very good point, actually, Molly. She says, if PayPal and others can do this, and Coutts, what next? Broadband access, train access, emergency services. And so I think this might seem, people might go, oh, it's just Nigel Farage can't get a bank account. It is not
much bigger. It's much
bigger. The implications are huge, aren't they, Olivia?
Yeah, and I mean, the fact that having a bank account is now an essential service. I mean, obviously, it's always been pretty useful to have a bank account, but previously, it was possible, if you wanted to, simply to have all of your money in cash under your mattress. Now, with places not taking cash anymore, a bank is an essential service. And it sounds as though Coutts might not be the only bank that Nigel Farage has been turned away from.
Well, he says 10. We're going to have Nigel. He's going to be on within about the next half an hour or so. So don't go anywhere, because
fireworks.
There has been a lot going on for Nigel Farage in the last 24 hours, and we will find out all about it. Olivia, thank you.
He's always been an heroic figure for me, but this is, I just think the Coutts have lost the plot completely. This is the royal bank. I think it'd be fantastic if members of the royal family said, enough with this, we're pulling out our money. Wouldn't that be great?
I can't really imagine King Charles doing anything to defend Nigel Farage, can you? I mean, it would be, it would be lovely.
It would be great.
If you're watching, Your Majesty.
Of course he's watching. and Queen Consort, if you're watching or listening, sort it.
They've got a Coutts chequebook.
Yeah.
Likes a chequebook.
I do like my chequebook.
Now,
it's not a Coutts chequebook, though.
Retailers have been feeling the pinch since the pandemic, with an estimated 18,000 shops shutting down throughout the UK in 2022.
But here we talk about one landlord in Dorset who's turned the tables. He's attempted to turn things around by offering 2 years rent-free to high street businesses that will take on the challenge of bringing one of the empty units to life.
Sounds like a great idea, so let's see if it's worked. Joining us now is Alex Schlegman, founding partner at SaveTheHighStreet.org. Tell us about this, Alex. Give us a bit more detail to this story.
So the gaps left by big brands very publicly disappearing from high streets across the UK, they're either shrinking or they're disappearing entirely, now need to be filled by a new generation of entrepreneurs with access to the space and support that they need to be successful. And these entrepreneurs are either start-up businesses entirely, or they're businesses that are selling online, or they're growing local independents who are moving maybe from a market or from a secondary location into more of a town or city centre. And so it's very important that in the market we create the conditions to allow this to happen. So there's a number of different initiatives going on across the UK, including this example down in Poole, where they're giving 2 years rent-free for the businesses. In other examples, here at SaveTheHighStreet.org, we're setting up incubator spaces that give businesses the chance for 2 months to try out a space with no rents, no business rates, no service charges, and a load of support to give them a chance to test out their offering in a high street setting, prove that it works before doubling down and starting to commit to paying either rent in a conventional way or rent linked to the performance of their business. So what's happened post-COVID particularly is a need to innovate around reducing the friction to get new businesses onto high streets.
So, Alex, with this one particular landlord, he was able to afford to give people his premises for 2 years without receiving any rent. Have I understood that correctly? But I guess most landlords can't afford to do that.
So the landlords that are able to make those kind of decisions typically own a lot of real estate in that local area. So in this case here, they own the shopping centre next door. And what they're looking to do is basically inject life into that entire town centre to get more footfall there. There's also the total cost of these spaces here. So you need to look at the total cost, and there's actually business rates that typically businesses will still be expected to pay, which if they didn't pay, the landlord would have to pay themselves.
Alex, the local councils, of course, can help too. Parking is always a huge issue for high streets if people can't park or it's too expensive to park. And yet there's very little movement from councils in that area.
Well, look, we're in the most transformational period in the entire history of high streets. We need to be very clear about that. Post-COVID is an opportunity for us to very quickly accelerate towards a stronger, more sustainable, future-thinking high street. And there's lots that needs to be done by everybody, even at the business level themselves, Andrew. We need to start to think about not just selling products, but selling experiences. We need to make sure businesses are ready for the future. They need to be online and using the internet to their advantage to get people back into high streets. They need to be data-driven. They need to be community-driven, working together. And yes, the councils have a very important role to play on a number of levels, and not just parking. A significant amount of funding has been released by central government as part of the Levelling Up agenda, and a series of other funds that are now being added to a whole series of strategies to support high streets in different ways. Parking is one of many things that councils and high streets overall need to think about.
Alex, I'm kind of interested. The fact you're the founding partner at SaveTheHighStreet.org. What's your interest in this topic? What can people do to help?
Yeah, so we're really interested in changing high streets for the better for everyone. So from our point of view, we want to make sure that every single type of stakeholder that has an interest in high streets is able to do the things that they can do to have the impact to make a difference. So if you're an independent business, it's very important that there's a number of things that you really focus on making your business as strong as it can be for the future. And there's a whole range of support we're providing around that. For councils, we're running a series of initiatives in partnership with councils to make sure that the plans are in place for that high street, that they've got the right businesses in the right places doing the right things, and that the councils really understand the things that they can be doing to have an impact. If you're a landlord with vacant space, it's about taking it over and making use of it.
We've run out of time, but please come back and talk to us again, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. I think there's probably a lot more we can learn there. Right, still to come this morning, more on Nigel Farage's battle against Coutts Bank.
And Nigel's going to be joining us to discuss what is, frankly, a scandal. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, People's Channel.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good morning. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It is a fairly pleasant and sunny start to the day for many of us. Good amount of sunshine, and some of us will hold on to that sunshine throughout the day as well. But do keep the umbrella on hand, because we will start to see some showers bubbling up quite widely across the UK. They could turn on the sharp side in places. Most persistently across parts of Shetland up to north east Scotland, where it will also remain relatively breezy. But elsewhere, with light winds, it should feel pleasant in that sunshine, highs between 18 and 24 degrees Celsius. Into this evening, those showers will gradually fade their way out, and many of us will see some clear intervals developing and hold on to some of those clear skies overnight as well. Touch more cloud pushing across Northern Ireland into parts of southern Scotland, northern England, but particularly where you hold on to those clearer skies, temperatures will drop down to around 10 degrees Celsius in cities, even into single figures in some rural areas. We start off Friday then, again, still with some sunshine around, but perhaps cloudier for that central slice through there. And then increasingly into the afternoon, we could start to see some of those showers push further south as well. Always Shetland and far north east of Scotland staying that bit breezier and generally cloudier. Temperatures perhaps a smidgen down compared to Thursday, but still relatively pleasant, around 18 to 21 degrees Celsius. Do make the most of the sunshine that you've got over the next couple of days, though, because this area of low pressure is moving its way in for the weekend. Going to bring a spell of much more widely wet and windy weather. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 20th of July. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
It's the summer of strikes. It's underway. Thousands of hospital consultants have walked out this morning for 48 hours over dispute over pay. NHS bosses warn there'll be severe disruption.
And it's not just the senior doctors. Many of you might have had your travel disrupted today due to rail staff striking again in a long-running dispute over pay. Is your patience wearing thin with all of these strikes? How is it affecting you?
And Farage versus Coutts. You know who's winning that row. The Prime Minister's intervened, stating that no one should have their bank account closed because of their political views. Delighted that Nigel Farage is joining us live this morning on this programme to give his take.
And later in the show, we're going to discuss new research that Britons spend less time in the office than anywhere else in Europe. Have we all become a bit lazy? Or is working from home the future, especially for parents? Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. But first of all, here's the very latest news with Aaron Armstrong.
Good morning, it's a minute past 10. Let's get you up to date with the headlines from the GB Newsroom. Voting has started in 3 by-elections taking place in England today. All 3 seats in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, Selby and Ainsty and Somerton and Frome have been held by the Conservatives since the last general election in 2019. Polling stations will close at 10 p.m. and constituents will need to bring photo ID with them to vote. Thousands of medical appointments and operations have been postponed as senior doctors hold a 48-hour strike over pay. Consultants and dentists have agreed to offer emergency care only as they walk out for the first time in a decade. Now, NHS bosses have warned of severe disruption to patient care. It all comes just 2 days after junior doctors walked out for 5 days, the longest strike in the history of the NHS. Health Secretary Steve Barclay, though, says the government has listened to the BMA's demands.
Average NHS earnings of a consultant after this pay rise will be £134,000 a year. And on top of that, 20% of their salary goes into their pension, which means they'll be able to earn, when they retire by the age of 65, tax-free up to £60,000 a year. The number one ask of the BMA was for pension tax reform, and we listened to that ask, we acted on it, and in addition we've also accepted in full the independent pay review body recommendations.
Rail passengers are facing further disruption this morning as some 20,000 RMT members go on strike. It's the first of 3 days of industrial action, which will affect 14 train companies in England, although it may have a knock-on effect in Wales and Scotland too. Drivers in the ASLEF union are being banned from doing overtime this week. General Secretary Mick Lynch, though, is hopeful fresh talks will mirror the progress he's making with London Underground.
Let's try and get a deal cooked up that we can try and get back around the table. We're doing that with London Transport right now about what's going on London Underground. We've been in ACAS, the conciliation service, all week. So if we can get the same atmosphere where people are trying to work towards some solutions, perhaps we can do that on National Rail. I'm hoping that maybe London Underground will come up with some proposals that are steps forward, and we can consider that. But if we can do that on both parts of the railway, if you like, we can maybe get some progress.
Now, travelling to Europe via train is on average 4 times more expensive than flying. That's according to Greenpeace analysis. Flying was cheaper on all of the routes from the UK, including between London and Edinburgh, according to the environmental group. Now, travelling to Barcelona from London by train was 10 times more expensive on average, and a last-minute booking was up to 30 times more expensive. The EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, says Russia is responsible for causing a major global food crisis. On Monday, Moscow withdrew from the grain deal, which guaranteed safe passage of Ukrainian shipments through the Black Sea. Russia has subsequently bombed storage facilities in Odessa and other port cities. And global wheat prices have now soared following Russia's threat to view ships bound for Ukrainian ports as potential military targets. At least 2 people have died and multiple people have been injured after a shooting in Auckland in New Zealand. A man opened fire in the centre of the city, in the business district, early this morning, local time. He was also killed. The Prime Minister of New Zealand has confirmed there's been no change, though, to national security and the risk of that after the shootings. The FIFA World Cup, though, will go on as planned. It is underway in New Zealand. The investigation is still ongoing. Instances of anti-Muslim hate have more than doubled in a decade, according to new research. The study by the monitoring group Tell Mama covered more than 20,000 cases over a decade, looking at online hate towards Muslims. Now, the group said the activities of the far right have led to a spike in abuse. Other peaks came around the time of attacks against asylum seekers and centres supporting them, and also when the cricketer Azim Rafiq highlighted the racist abuse he had suffered at Yorkshire Cricket Club. TikTok is now the most single-use source of news across all platforms for teenagers in the UK. Ofcom's news consumption report found it's the most favoured platform amongst 12 to 15 years old. Figures show TikTok is most popular with young people and used by 28% of teenagers, followed by YouTube and Instagram, both at 25%. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens, as always. And now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Thousands of senior doctors in England are on strike today over pay, causing massive disruption across the NHS.
Consultant doctors and dentists are staging a 48-hour walkout which threatens to bring planned procedures to a standstill.
So let's talk to GB News South West England reporter Jeff Moody. Jeff, you're outside a hospital. Tell us all.
Yes, I'm outside the Royal Infirmary here in Bristol, where the picket line began at 9 o'clock this morning. The strike itself began at 7 o'clock and is set to go on for 48 hours till 7 o'clock on Saturday morning. Well, it's the consultants today that are on strike, and that's particularly disruptive because the consultants are the key to everything in the NHS. Junior doctors, for instance, can't really do their jobs without the consultant work that backs them up. They're very heavily reliant on these consultants. So it does mean that the service being offered in the Royal Infirmary behind me is said to be a Christmas Day type service, which means emergency care only, some small routine procedures, but not very much at all. Most appointments have been cancelled, most operations have been cancelled. In fact, I spoke to a gentleman just now who sadly didn't want to come on camera, but he was saying how bitterly angry he is that his wife has had 3 operations postponed in the last few months due to the succession of strikes, from junior doctors to nurses to now the consultants. 3 times her operation has been cancelled, and he says he is absolutely fuming. Well, the consultants say that they are fuming too. They say they've reached rock bottom in this dispute. NHS England also say that they are fuming. They're fuming because they say they haven't had enough time after the junior doctors' strike to regroup, reorganise rotas, to sort things out, to provide adequate cover for this strike. They're saying that it's happened too soon off the back of the other strikes for them to properly work out how to staff things inside. So it's a very unhappy and angry situation for all concerned here.
Down in Bristol, thank you very much. Let us know this morning if you've been affected by this. You've been getting in touch already, talking about the strikes. Robert has said, I worked in the NHS until 4 months ago, not clinical staff, but procurement. The conditions that admin, estate staff, procurement and other support services work in is shocking.
And Roger says, am I the only person fed up listening to doctors and nurses saying, well, pay up or we're going to go to Australia? All I can say is we're not stopping you. If that's what you want to do, please go and hurry about it. Roger, I disagree. I'm afraid if you've trained in the NHS for all those years, there should be a limit on when you can go abroad, or you have to repay the money.
Colin has said, thank you, Colin, and good morning. I would like you to report on how governments have consistently underfunded the NHS, brought in private interests that drain it of resources, with agreements with American big pharma to get a piece of the pie. They seem to be pushing hard towards privatisation, which is the worst possible outcome for the entire population.
Indeed. Well, let's move on now to the extraordinary story about Nigel Farage, Coutts, the banking scandal. It's united, it's on many front pages again today. Rishi Sunak talked about it in the House of Commons, many Tory MPs raised. Rishi Sunak couldn't quite bring himself to mention Trevor Kavanagh, but somebody who... Rishi Sunak couldn't bring himself to mention Nigel Farage, but somebody who will is the Sun's very excellent columnist, Trevor Kavanagh. Trevor, morning to you.
Are you there?
Good morning. Trevor, this is quite an extraordinary story. I mean, Coutts have been caught out hook, line and sinker here.
They have. I mean, this is an extraordinary story in every possible way and deeply sinister. What we've learned over the last few days is that we do live in a world of Big Brother, a sort of Stasi-type environment which we thought was only used to exist and in the past in other countries, but now we have it here in Britain. And what is most worrying about this is that it's not just one company, one bank, Coutts Bank. This is a view of the world, a world view which is held right across commerce, broadcasting, politics and Whitehall. And I suspect that precisely the same sort of procedures and vetting processes are taking place in companies up and down the country. We don't know about it. This is an amazing story that has broken simply because of Coutts' cack-handedness. They've ripped the lid off an amazing scandal, which I think is much more widespread and deeply sinister.
Also, the BBC here, Trevor, are part of it in a sense, aren't they? Because they reported that Nigel Farage had lost his account because he didn't have the money in the account. Not true. We now discover in the Daily Telegraph today that Simon Jack, the BBC's business editor, was sitting next to the chief executive of Coutts Bank at a dinner the night before they ran the story. Funny, that.
Well, it isn't funny, really, Andrew, because I think that the BBC is as much a part of this sort of process as sort of... I noticed that all the way through the versions of events that have come from Coutts is the word purpose, or common purpose here, is on the inclusion and diversity agenda, net zero, the gender wars and so on. This is in itself a significant fact because you're long enough in the tooth to remember common purpose and the organisation, a very sort of a secretive organisation, which is now global, which uses exactly the same terminology. And they were set up in order to affect and influence our police, our local authorities, Whitehall, and indeed, it seems, the banks. And they are having an extraordinary impact. They are the blob in essence, and they have spread their tentacles through almost every part of our administration, our government and our commerce.
I don't want to defend Coutts, Trevor, but just to play devil's advocate here, they would say we have a responsibility to our employers, our employees and our shareholders to be environmentally and socially responsible. We have to save the planet and we have to teach everybody what is the right way to behave, whilst we're also looking after your money. But something in that is deeply flawed, isn't it?
It's deeply flawed while they're still accommodating people who have extremely nefarious backgrounds in terms of crime, politics, people from abroad with very shady records on all sorts of things from crime to embezzlement. And yet they decide that because of his 86 references to Brexit, that Nigel Farage is simply intolerable.
Do you think he should sue over this report, Trevor? Because I think it's defamatory. It's called him racist, homophobic, disingenuous, a variety of deeply, deeply personal criticisms of him. And it's in an official document. He must have grounds to sue the bank.
Well, I would happily back that idea. I think that Nigel has all sorts of grounds to act on. It's not just against Coutts, but against the BBC. But this is much bigger than Nigel Farage. This is a threat to the way we live, the fact that we have people watching us without our knowledge and judging us and actually ruling on our ability to go about our daily lives, which, after all, is what banking is all about these days. We don't have cash anymore. We have to do it digitally. We have to go through a bank. We have to have a bank account. And even beggars in the street have bank accounts, and you can make your donations to their cause with their cash card system. So we cannot operate without banks. This is our way we live. And it's not just, as I say, that the Coutts are doing this. Every boardroom, and I know this from people who represent major companies in their media relations, that they are everything is filtered through the lens of diversity and the sort of blob mentality of the right approach to gender wars, to net zero, to Brexit, and beyond. And while this is going on, until this week, we didn't know about it. Now we do. And I think it's incumbent upon everybody to act, not just Nigel Farage.
OK, thank you, Trevor. Trevor Kavanagh there from The Sun. Thank you. So interesting, such wisdom. And it's about manipulation, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about the fact that we don't know. We don't even know we're being manipulated.
As they're watching us now, are they deciding, can we keep our bank accounts?
Well, absolutely.
Because that's what could be happening to many, many people.
And we've got Laura Dodsworth, who's she wrote the book State of Fear, about how the government weaponised fear in the pandemic. She's going to be coming into the studio this morning, actually. She's talking about how some of these nudge units have worked. And I do think it's relevant. It ties in with this. We need to read the statement from Coutts.
Yeah, but but to remind people, though, Nigel Farage is coming on to talk about this. He's had an extraordinary 24 hours. And Trevor Kavanagh makes the point, it's not just about Nigel, but Nigel is the embodiment of what's going wrong with this country. The big brother knows best approach.
I had dinner with Nigel Farage last night, actually. So I can tell you there has been a huge amount going on, and he will have a lot to say this morning. It is not Coutts' policy, say the bank, to close customer accounts solely on the basis of legally held political and personal views.
Decisions to close an account are not taken lightly. They involve a number of factors, including commercial viability, reputational considerations and legal and regulatory requirements. And, of course, if you support Brexit, you can't have a bank account, clearly, at Coutts. And, of course, they got rid of his bank account after he'd paid off his mortgage. So cynical.
So cynical. We're going to get to more of your views as well this morning, so please let us know if this has affected you in any particular way. Have you been turned down for any sort of banking services? Did you get an explanation why? And if not, what do you do about it? But still to come, as we say, Nigel will be talking to us here on GB News, Britain's Newsroom.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good morning. I'm Jonathan Vautry, here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It is a fairly pleasant and sunny start to the day for many of us. Good amount of sunshine, and some of us will hold on to that sunshine throughout the day as well. But do keep the umbrella on hand, because we will start to see some showers bubbling up quite widely across the UK. They could turn on the sharp side in places. Most persistently across parts of Shetland up to North East Scotland, where it will also remain relatively breezy. But elsewhere, with light winds, it should feel pleasant in that sunshine, highs between 18 and 24 degrees Celsius. Into this evening, those showers will gradually fade their way out, and many of us will see some clear intervals developing and hold on to some of those clear skies overnight as well. Touch more cloud pushing across Northern Ireland into parts of southern Scotland, northern England, but particularly where you hold on to those clearer skies, temperatures will drop down to around 10 degrees Celsius in cities, even into single figures in some rural areas. We start off Friday then, again, still with some sunshine around, but perhaps cloudier for that central slice through there. And then increasingly into the afternoon, we could start to see some of those showers push further south as well. Always Shetland and the far north east of Scotland staying that bit breezier and generally cloudier. Temperatures perhaps a smidgen down compared to Thursday, but still relatively pleasant, around 18 to 21 degrees Celsius. Do make the most of the sunshine that you've got over the next couple of days, though, because this area of low pressure is moving its way in for the weekend. Going to bring a spell of much more widely wet and windy weather. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point, but bomb.
And action.
Sergeant read my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's 10:23. You're with Britain's News and with GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So Rishi Sunak and Ben Wallace formally apologised to the Commons yesterday for the decades-long ban on LGBT people serving in the UK Armed Forces after the publication of a government-commissioned review.
The Prime Minister said the ban, which lasted from 1967 to 2000, was an appalling failure of the British state, decades behind the law of this land.
So Major General Tim Cross, who commanded one of 3 divisions in the UK Field Army, joins us from the home of the British Army in Aldershot. Good morning to you. I think a lot of people, Tim, will be really shocked to think that this ban continued until the year 2000.
Yeah, it did, and I was still serving throughout that period, actually. Let me start with a story. The British military is about delivering what we call fighting power, the ability to win on a battlefield. When I was in Australia, I lived in Australia in the early 1950s as a young boy, and my father worked for Shell, and he employed a man called Mike Calvert. Mike Calvert was known as Mad Mike Calvert. He was a Royal Engineer, and he fought with the Chindits under Wavell in the Far East against the Japanese. One of the bravest men I've ever met, actually. I had him to come and lecture when I was a member of the directing staff at the British Army Staff College. A wonderful guy and a very, very brave man.
he was basically forced out of the British Army of being suspected to be a homosexual, which was a disgrace. This is not about people's sexuality. It's about their ability to win on a battlefield. And the fact that this went on for so long is wrong. And most people, when they suffer these sort of things, want an apology. And in particular, I think for the military, anybody who suffered by not, for example, being awarded a campaign medal for serving in places like Northern Ireland or indeed the Falklands campaign or anywhere else, they need to be recompensed for that, as in receive their medal.
And Tim, I'm glad you raised that, because some servicemen actually had their medals removed from them when the army discovered they were homosexual, which is so shaming and appalling.
It is, and in a way, almost unbelievable, really. Now, it has to be said, I'm not a great fan of apologising for morality of 100 years ago or whatever. But I do think in this particular case, it's absolutely right, because that is a scandal, and I think people need to be, they need to receive an apology. And I think there are going to be things, that come out of the woodwork in years ahead of the morality that we live in today in all sorts of areas that probably we're going to have to find ourselves apologising for too.
What was the logic, Tim, what was the logic behind it? Can I ask you, what was the logic behind the ban? What was the logic behind the ban? Was there a fear that homosexual men would pounce on heterosexual soldiers in the trenches or something? I mean, what was the logic?
No, it wasn't that, but it does come back to this issue of fighting power.
Right.
When you're on operation, the heart of winning on a battlefield is about what we call the moral component. It's about friendship. It's about being prepared to die for your mates. And there was this concern that anybody who didn't contribute to fighting power, who weakened it or watered it down or whatever, we shouldn't have. Now that includes, I have to say, people who committed adultery, people who had an affair. So if as a commanding officer, for example, of a regiment, you had an affair with the wife of one of your young soldiers, you were court-martialed. You were kicked out of the army. If you were a serial adulterer, you were kicked out. So because you were undermining the moral component of fighting power. Now, wrongly, in my view, but because of the story that I've already told you, it was considered that being a homosexual automatically undermined that fighting power. Now, it may have done with some people. It may have been that some homosexual people were predatory or whatever, and if that was proven to be the case, they would have to be dismissed, the same as somebody who committed adultery or whatever. But a blanket ban on that basis was clearly wrong.
And so you think they were right to apologise yesterday, Tim? I mean, I'm with you. I think people apologising for things that they didn't do or they had nothing to do with always feels a little bit hollow. But I think even the very fact that we're discussing it and discussing how recently this change had to happen, I think probably that justifies why they needed to raise it in the Commons, didn't it? Because, of course, a younger generation have no idea that this was going on as recently as 2000.
No, that's right. No, I think it is right. Ben Wallace, who I've got a lot of time for, and sadly is stepping down as Secretary of State for Defence and leaving the Commons at the next election. I think Ben, wanted to do this probably before he left, and he was right to raise it, and it's been right that they've done it. And like all these things, we've got to be careful we don't keep banging on about it, to coin a phrase. I mean, it's happened. We recognise what has happened. It's now been apologised for. And the military today is a very different place to the military that I joined back in the 1960s, actually, and then commissioned in 1970, in all sorts of ways. It's still a tough fighting organisation, but rightly, it sees things differently. It sees things through a different lens, which is good.
And Tim, just finally, do you think now for homosexual men or gay women, is a career in the military now okay, or do you think there is still residual discrimination?
I don't honestly think there is discrimination per se. I mean, there is discrimination in all sorts of ways. The bottom line is, of course, we're all flawed human beings. We all get things wrong. We all make mistakes. We all say things we shouldn't say. And in the military, I often say in these sort of interviews, the British Army is a deeply flawed organisation because it's made up of people like me. But, institutionally, it has changed dramatically. There are still issues of misogyny and sexism and so forth, which, come to light on a pretty regular basis, as they do in every other aspect of society. And we're just hearing about it in McDonald's, of course. But in the military, in fact, I had a young lad chatting with me the other day and said to me, did I think he should join? And I don't understand why anybody between the ages of about 18 and 25 wants to do anything other than be in the military. It's a fantastic life. It's a wonderful career, wonderful people. With lots of opportunities. And it will never be perfect, but it is a much, much better place today in the context of our conversation. So, yes, I think it's a great place for young people to join and have a thoroughly successful and happy career.
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Tim. Major General Tim Cross there. I think I'm going to go and sign my son up.
Well, I think it's a great option.
It is, isn't it?
And it is staggering that only 20 years ago it was still, you couldn't be gay. And so if you were found out, you were court-martialed.
Doesn't it show you, though, how far that pendulum is swung, that we spend so much time now talking about Pride Week?
Yeah. And I've had many criticisms, Tony Blair. I mean, I could criticise Tony Blair all day, but in the terms of for gay men and women, he transformed the lives of gay men and women because civil partnerships, equal age of consent. And look, people now, you go into your card shop and there's a card for civil partnerships. Yeah. And you see Granny saying, I want a civil card for my granddaughter. And I think it's rather charming.
I do.
And that's give Blair. I will give him some credit, not much, but for that.
Doesn't happen very often, does it? That no. Let's just give you a couple more views that you've been getting in touch with this morning. This is about the strikes in the NHS. Barbara has said, from my experience of working throughout my professional life, junior doctors have always been paid poorly. They work 24/7 and sometimes, due to their on-call rotas, don't get sleep for days. To pay them less per hour, for example, like hospital cleaners, is appalling.
But they're not going to get 35%, and that's the problem. No. They're seeking a 35% pay rise, which is wildly unrealistic, particularly if you've just seen inflation drop below 8%.
Yeah, and Anne has said, why don't people watch 999 Critical Condition? Well, presumably they're watching GB News when that's on, Anne.
Yes.
She said, then they will realise why these doctors deserve to be looked after. After all their studying, coming out of university saddled with debts, not to mention the pressures they're under every day. I don't think any of us would dispute that it's a difficult and necessary job.
Certainly is. Now, Nigel Farage is joining us later. Very excited about that. He's going to talk about the great Coutts banking scandal.
That's right. All after your news.
It's 10:32. Good morning to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong here in the GB Newsroom. Well, voting started in the 3 by-elections that are taking place in England today. All 3 seats in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, in Selby and Ainsty and Somerton in Frome have been held by the Conservatives since the last general election in 2019. The polling stations will close tonight at 10 o'clock. Constituents will need to bring photo ID with them if they want to vote. Thousands of medical appointments and operations have been postponed as senior doctors hold a 48-hour strike over pay. Consultants and dentists have agreed to offer emergency care only as they walk out for the first time in a decade. It comes just 2 days after junior doctors staged a 5-day walkout, the longest in the history of the NHS. Health Secretary Steve Barclay, though, says the government have listened to the BMA's demands.
Average NHS earnings of a consultant after this pay rise will be £134,000 a year. And on top of that, 20% of their salary goes into their pension, which means they'll be able to earn, when they retire by the age of 65, tax-free up to £60,000 a year. The number one ask of the BMA was for pension tax reform, and we listened to that ask, we acted on it, and in addition we've also accepted in full the independent pay review body recommendations.
Rail passengers are facing further disruption this morning as RMT members launch fresh strikes. It's the first day of 3 days of industrial action affecting 14 train companies in England, although it may have a knock-on effect into Scotland and Wales too. In some areas, half train services will be running. Other areas will have no services at all. Supermarkets aren't displaying prices as clearly as they should, preventing shoppers from finding the best deals. The Competition and Markets Authority has found retailers could be hampering people's ability to compare products. The watchdog is warning supermarkets to make the necessary changes or risk facing enforcement action, and it's calling on the government to tighten the law around pricing displays. More on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And a quick look at the markets today. The pound will buy you $1.2912 and €1.1515. The price of gold, £1,535 and 3 pence per ounce. The FTSE 100 is at 7,636 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's 10:38. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
The Australian state of Victoria, they've pulled out of holding the 2026 Commonwealth Games, they say, because of the spiralling costs.
Now, it's a very unexpected announcement, this, and it means that one of the major events for many athletes is now in jeopardy with less than 3 years to go.
So we're joined now by the former Australian Foreign Minister, Alexander Downer. Morning to you, Alexander.
Good morning.
This is mean-spirited, isn't it?
I think it is, yes. I think it's rather shocking. I mean, a month ago, they estimated the cost would be 2.6 billion Australian dollars. That's about what's that? About £1.5 billion, a bit less than that. So that's pretty much the cost of the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. And then suddenly the Premier of the state, like the Prime Minister of the state, announced that it would cost $6 to $7 billion and therefore was being cancelled. So you can only be very suspicious of what might have gone on here. But of course, it fires a torpedo into the highest profile of all Commonwealth events, the flagship event of the Commonwealth, the once every 4 years Commonwealth Games, and now they'll have difficulty finding another country to host it or another city to host it.
Well, he's obviously cooked the books, hasn't he, to come up with those wildly exaggerated, the huge change in those figures, Alexander. Is he anti-Commonwealth, do you think, the Premier of that state?
I think we're talking about the awful Dan Andrews here, aren't we?
Dan Andrews, exactly. So he's the Premier, like the state Prime Minister of the state of Victoria, very left-wing.
Very.
Exactly. Yes, he would have no sympathy for the Commonwealth. Of course, he'd be a strong Republican, not that that's particularly relevant to this issue, but he would associate the two, no doubt, in his own mind. So my guess is that they decided, the Labor Party in Victoria, his political party, decided in the lead up to the last state election to agree to host these Commonwealth Games in a whole lot of regional centres, which logistically would be incredibly difficult and obviously very expensive, as an election promise, as an election bribe in regional Victoria. Having won the election, he's decided he can junk that, and the way to do it is to pretend that it would cost $7 billion to hold it, which clearly wouldn't cost anything like that in reality.
I mean, this is a man who was on the TV pretty much nightly during the pandemic, wanting more and more restrictions on more and more young people, closing swimming pools, closing athletics tracks, parks. This is a guy that never showed any compassion for young people, actually. And the implications of this, of saying we don't want the Commonwealth Games, particularly to the Australians, for whom swimming, netball, a sport like netball, the ones that the Aussies excel at, there is no netball in the Olympics. This is their Olympics. How can he just say this and just not care about all of those athletes who've trained for their whole lives?
I feel less sorry for the Australian, British, Canadian and New Zealand athletes, because they do get many opportunities, and of course their sports bodies have a lot of money. But I really feel sorry for the athletes who come from small island developing states, places like St Kitts and Nevis and Samoa and so on, and smaller countries like Papua New Guinea. The Commonwealth Games are a highlight for athletes, and it's something that their young athletes work towards, and then just to cancel it like this, obviously just for political reasons, is outrageous. And you make a good point, by the way, about the lockdowns. Dan Andrews, this Premier we're talking about, locked down Melbourne for longer than any other city in the whole world. In the whole world. Children were locked up at schools for something like 240 days.
Alexander, do you think what he really wants to do is get Australia out of the Commonwealth altogether?
I'm sure he'd be happy to see Australia leave the Commonwealth. Let me just say this, though. He is only a state premier.
Of course.
Australia does have a national government, and I'm very surprised. I'm very surprised the federal government hasn't intervened and tried to put together a package here to try to make sure that the Commonwealth Games will continue to be held in Australia. But they have simply said, the Prime Minister has simply said, this is a matter for the Victorian government. Actually, it's not. It's a matter for the whole of the Commonwealth, and it's a matter for Australia's reputation. So, look, honestly, normally I stick up for everything that happens in Australia and what Australia do, but I cannot stick up for this decision.
And it might be that we come along and save the day. We will have the Commonwealth Games potentially back here. We did an amazing job in Birmingham. It was only last year, wasn't it? Phenomenal success of those games. Maybe, Alexander, we can save the day.
The difficulty is, though, for example, if you take Birmingham, or you can think 4 years earlier, the Gold Coast in Australia, which is just near Brisbane, where very successful Commonwealth Games were held as well. The sports facilities are all still there, or pretty much there, but the Commonwealth Village, the Athletes' Village, has all been sold off.
Yeah.
And difficulty, you'd have to rebuild a village, and as you know, finding the land for building, that's all controversial.
Yeah, well, it is very controversial. Thank you so much for joining us. That was really interesting, actually. Former Australian Foreign Minister Alexander Downer there.
I think we should pinch them.
Do you know what? I'm not
Should we
entirely
just
sure we
tell everybody who's here? Carol Malone is here. You'll know the voice. Sam Lister's here as well from the
She
Express.
normally makes a clattering racket
I'm
when
alright
she
with
walks in.
No,
Do you think we should do it?
No, do you know I don't? I know. I mean, I've just listened to what Alexander said and completely sympathise. But I'm just thinking, London is skint, and why is Sadiq Khan?
Can go back to Birmingham.
Well, would we go back to Birmingham? Sadiq Khan can't speak for Birmingham, and he says London is ready and willing and able to take it on. But how can it be?
Well, I guess it will bring more money than it would cost us, Sam. These events, I mean, it packs out the hotels in Birmingham, the restaurants, the transport. It's brilliant for the city.
But all the hotels are full of migrants.
Let's
be honest.
400 hotels.
Yeah, well, that's the truth, isn't it? I don't wish to be unkind.
I'm sure we could find a few rooms in Birmingham. It's big enough, but I think, I think as long as the public aren't having to foot the bill,
yes.
I think that's the big problem, isn't it? And
well,
it's a very difficult time for...
But Sadiq Khan wants to do this because he's got a mayoral campaign next year.
Well, he has.
And he's up against this woman. See the front of the Standard? That was a flattering photograph, wasn't it?
So that's Susan Hall.
She looks like a loony.
So, it's not what I was just saying. Why don't they put up somebody everyone knows, a big player? Instead, I mean, she doesn't look good there.
No.
She does say she's going to ban Newlands, which is...
hold that up?
It's a terrible photo.
I can't believe that this photo was entirely accidental on the part of...
We're trying to show it, but nobody's looking.
On the part
there
of
she is.
the Standard. So this is Susan Hall.
Photograph. So that's a sign that the Standard are not going to back the party in that mayoral election.
That is true.
They've chosen a photo which looks slightly deranged.
Yeah, not slightly.
And it's not entirely flattering.
No.
And Sam, I mean, does she have any chance? Maybe they could cast her as a good, strong matriarch, because we need some of those in politics, don't we?
Yeah, but I think the point is that the Tories, they could have won. You, Les, is absolutely hated in London.
Yes.
They had a fighting chance of winning this, and instead they've chosen they've chosen a woman that nobody knows.
Nobody's ever heard of her.
She might be brilliant, but nobody knows who she is. And if they'd have chosen, like, a big hitter, they were in with a chance, and it almost feels a bit like they just want, they're not bothered about losing it. They don't want to win it. There's no hunger there to win it.
Do you think of the big figures who've been mayor? Boris, Ken Livingstone. The Tories had tried Geoffrey Archer at one stage, Steve North. These are big figures.
And Khan, is not, although everyone knows his name, but everyone knows his name because of the mistakes he's made, and because of the things he's done wrong and for the money he's overspent.
Yeah.
He's not thought of as a big hitter because he's good.
Nigel Farage. Now, he'd have been a candidate for mayor of London. That would have been interesting.
You know what I'm waiting for? To find out when all our bank accounts are going to be cancelled.
Well, they're probably watching us now, Malone.
Yeah.
Thinking, what's she saying?
Well, I don't think... It's interesting, isn't it? Coutts kept on talking about the reputational damage caused by having Nigel as a client. And what they've done is actually, it's completely banjaxed their own reputation. Their bigotry and their division and their... it's interesting, they're saying, I think they have to publish a list of these so-called values that they...
I agree.
Because this is the bank, if you remember, in 2012, that was fined £8.5 million by the Financial Services Authority for not giving proper care to their... how should we say, not dodgy money, but the money that was coming through their accounts that wasn't 100% kosher. So, their values are questionable, to say the least, frankly, but...
Can we ask about the BBC as well? Because we mustn't let them off the hook here, because the Telegraph has reported today, brilliantly, that the Simon Jack, the BBC business editor, sat next to Alison Rose, the very woke chief executive of Coutts Bank, the night before the BBC ran that story saying Nigel Farage's account had been closed because he didn't have enough money in the bank, which was a lie.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, Simon Jack, if he's been told that by the top person at the bank, then clearly you, as a journalist, should report it.
Yeah.
But obviously, the question's for the bank.
Right, we're going to be joined by Nigel Farage.
Here he is.
Now. Sorry, Sam, to interrupt you. Good morning.
Drum roll.
Good morning, Nigel. Well, you've had a rather busy 24 hours. Bring our viewers and our listeners up to speed, Nigel. What's happened in the last day?
I've been cancelled. I'm now a non-person. I don't exist. Do you realise I think Ricky Gervais is funny? I know the Djokovic's. I mean, the crimes that I've committed, the list is as long as your arm. Look, you know, I've done two things. Firstly, I've blown the whistle on the British banking industry, which has been going in the wrong direction for years and years and years. Many thousands of people who don't have a platform have been shut down, have been closed out, and that's really awful. But also, I've used something called subject access request, which I didn't even know existed 2 months ago. And it's important for us as a channel now to say to people, if you've been closed down by the bank or treated badly, you have as much right as I do to put in subject access requests. And I recommend that you do.
What was your thought, Nigel, when you got this dossier on your desk for the first time and you saw yourself talked about in those terms of being disingenuous, homophobic, racist? Just what was the emotion?
I expected the report to say, because I'm a politically exposed person, the costs of compliance are too great, therefore we don't want the account. That was what I expected, you know. Of course, if you're mega rich, it wouldn't matter, but that's what I expected. When I looked at it, I simply couldn't believe the vile, horrible, vitriolic, prejudicial, I mean, literally every single one of the worst and often very wrong newspaper articles that's ever been written about me is there. And the way it's been written, you know, he's not yet been convicted of anything. Oh, well, that's nice of them, isn't it? It really was the most poisonous thing I've ever read about myself. I thought to myself, it was rather like being a barrister going into a criminal case. You know, this is a sort of charge sheet you'd have, and you'd cross-question the person in the dock. I was really, really shocked by it. It is absolutely horrible. And to have allowed the newspapers access to this and to put it out there, I have to be honest, it does cause a slight sense of disquiet within me. But I've done it because if we don't nip this in the bud, who the hell's going to go into public life in Britain? Because if your family can be subjected to being PEPs, that really is a price too high for going into politics or senior position in the judiciary or whatever it may be. But I've really done it because I've been aware for some years now that thousands of people are being shut down by the banks, particularly people taking cash as they want us to drive towards a cashless society. And thank goodness GBNews has got its Don't Kill Cash campaign. So I've done it on behalf of all the others. And what's really interesting is the response from members of parliament, the response from ministers, and even the Prime Minister has been as quick as it has. Why? Because they've been written to by their constituents for years. They've seen a banking industry making profits of 35 billion last year, an industry who, through their greed and stupidity, we bailed out, put our taxes up as a direct result of it. And those MPs are conscious of their own constituents being treated terribly.
Are you going to sue Coutts Bank for defamation? Because if I'd written that in my newspaper, or Carol had written her newspaper, or Sam was in her newspaper, we would expect to be sued because it is defamatory. Are you going to sue them?
I don't know yet, Andrew. Right now, my real focus right now is to get this debate out as broadly as possible, to get people to understand that subject access requests exist, and please to use them. And I'm going to urge the government and the Treasury Select Committee to act. Don't go to Benidorm for 3 weeks or wherever you might be going. That committee needs to haul Dame Alison in front of it in short order. We need to find out what is going on in a bank that has 19 million customers and is 39% owned by us, the taxpayer, still.
Nigel.
When it comes to options, I'm considering all options, Andrew. Right.
And there'll be some people who will say, well, it's only Nigel Farage, you know, he's a bit controversial, it's only him. But how many other people and what kinds of people have been in touch with you in the last 24 hours?
I've had one today, a chap who had a Coutts account, closed down 15 months ago with no good reason. He went to the financial ombudsman. He's still waiting for an answer. But he said, Nigel, I didn't know I could request this personal information. I've had another guy, a younger guy, client of Coutts, trades in cryptocurrencies. Apparently that's not acceptable to Coutts. But I've also had, you know, people running small businesses, and they go into their bank once a week, if they've still got a branch, that is, and they put in the takings. And the banks are saying, you know what? We don't want this. We don't need this. Go somewhere else. So a lot of little people, but I don't mean that in any pejorative sense. A lot of little people, sole traders, men and women running their own lives are effectively being shut out of the system. And Bev, it's thousands. It's thousands.
Can I ask you something? You know, what's really surprised me over this has been the response from people who I would say, some of whom are your greatest critics. And the reason they're on side with you over this is because they understand what it means. I think Andrew Neil called it today in the Mail. He called it a new form of McCarthyism.
Yes, he did.
I thought you might want to expand on that. Are you surprised at the support you've had from people who in the past have criticised you on all levels politically?
One of my daughters is very politically aware and has had to suffer being my daughter for many, many years, said to me she'd never seen such support from me online. Yeah, it's come from across the spectrum, and I'm really quite humbled about it. I really am.
Well, Nigel, thank you for joining us. Keep up the good fight. It's a very important fight because they could be watching us for here now.
Completely.
And they could close our backs. Now, we've got to read out this ridiculous statement from Coutts. I'm going to call it ridiculous because it is. But this is what they say. It is not Coutts' policy to close customer accounts solely on the basis of legally held political and personal views.
Yeah. That's right.
Well, did you believe a word of that?
Still to come, just how lazy are Britons? One survey has found that Brits work from home more than any other nation in Europe. We're GB News, Britain's news channel.
That's the civil service for you.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good morning. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It is a fairly pleasant and sunny start to the day for many of us. Good amount of sunshine, and some of us will hold on to that sunshine throughout the day as well. But do keep the umbrella on hand because we will start to see some showers bubbling up quite widely across the UK. They could turn on the sharp side in places. Most persistently across parts of Shetland up to North East Scotland, where it will also remain relatively breezy. But elsewhere, with light winds, it should feel pleasant in that sunshine, highs between 18 and 24 degrees Celsius. Into this evening, those showers will gradually fade their way out, and many of us will see some clear intervals developing and hold on to some of those clear skies overnight as well. Touch more cloud pushing across Northern Ireland into parts of southern Scotland, northern England, but particularly where you hold on to those clearer skies, temperatures will drop down to around 10 degrees Celsius in cities, even into single figures in some rural areas. We start off Friday then, again, still with some sunshine around, but perhaps cloudier for that central slice through there. And then increasingly into the afternoon, we could start to see some of those showers push further south as well. Always Shetland and the far north east of Scotland staying that bit breezier and generally cloudier. Temperatures perhaps a smidgen down compared to Thursday, but still relatively pleasant, around 18 to 21 degrees Celsius. Do make the most of the sunshine that you've got over the next couple of days, though, because this area of low pressure is moving its way in for the weekend. Going to bring a spell of much more widely wet and windy weather. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
Please stop. Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But bomb.
And action.
Read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 11 a.m. on Thursday, the 20th of July. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. Well, the summer of strikes is underway. Thousands of consultants have walked out this morning for 48 hours in a dispute over pay. NHS bosses are warning that there will be severe disruption.
And I'm afraid it's not just senior doctors. Many of you might have had your travel disrupted today. Yes, it's the trains drivers. The train staff are striking again. It's overpay. Is your patience wearing thin with all these strikes? Mine is.
And the Farage versus Coutts row rumbles on. The Prime Minister had his say yesterday, stating that no one should have their bank account closed because of their political views.
And later in the show, we're going to discuss new research which shows Britons spend less time in the office than, guess what, than anywhere else in Europe. Become a bit lazy. Is working from home the future? Civil servants answer the question.
And we would love to know what you think of everything we're discussing today.
And Nigel Farage was brilliant. If you heard his interview with us earlier, we'll play small clips from that. And he is considering taking legal action against Coutts. I think he should. He was defamed a lot of times in that document.
Yeah.
40 pages.
And as he said, when he saw it, he expected to see that he was politically vulnerable, and what he saw was very personal, and he said he was shocked.
And he's been in public life for decades, and he's had a lot of stuff written about him which has been hostile, but he couldn't believe just how inaccurate and hostile that was by Coutts Bank, which, don't forget, is state-owned. 38% of it is owned by the taxpayer.
He's not easily shocked, is Nigel Farage. So that says something, doesn't it? Right, first of all, here is your very latest news with Aaron.
It's 3 minutes past 11. Good morning from the GB Newsroom.
Voting has started. Polls are open in the 3 by-elections taking place across England today. All 3 seats in Uxbridge and South Ruislip in London, Selby and Ainsty in North Yorkshire, and Somerton and Frome in Somerset have been held by the Conservatives since the last general election in 2019. Polling stations will close at 10 o'clock tonight. Constituents will need to bring photo ID with them if they want to vote. Thousands of medical appointments and operations have been postponed as senior doctors hold a 48-hour strike over pay. Consultants and dentists have agreed to offer emergency care only as they work out for the first time in a decade. NHS bosses have warned of severe disruption to patient care, and it comes just 2 days after junior doctors staged a 5-day walkout, the longest in the history of the NHS. Health Secretary Steve Barclay says the government has listened to the BMA's demands.
Average NHS earnings of a consultant after this pay rise will be £134,000 a year. And on top of that, 20% of their salary goes into their pension, which means they'll be able to earn, when they retire by the age of 65, tax-free up to £60,000 a year. The number one ask of the BMA was for pension tax reform, and we listened to that ask, we acted on it, and in addition we've also accepted in full the independent pay review body recommendations.
Up to 20,000 rail staff are on strike this morning over job security and pay. It's causing disruption and cancellations across many services. It is the first of 3 days of industrial action over the next week and a half or so. It'll affect 14 train companies in England, which may have a knock-on effect into Scotland and Wales. Drivers in the ASLEF union additionally are banned from doing overtime this week. General Secretary Mick Lynch is hopeful fresh talks with Network Rail will mirror the progress he's making with London Underground.
Let's try and get a deal cooked up that we can try and get back around the table. We're doing that with London Transport right now about what's going on London Underground. We've been in ACAS, the conciliation service, all week. So if we can get the same atmosphere where people are trying to work towards some solutions, perhaps we can do that on National Rail. I'm hoping that maybe London Underground will come up with some proposals that are steps forward, and we can consider that. But if we can do that on both parts of the railway, if you like, we can maybe get some progress.
Travelling to Europe via train is on average 4 times more expensive than flying. That's according to Greenpeace analysis. Flying was cheaper on all routes from the UK, including between London and Edinburgh. Travelling to Barcelona from London by train was 10 times more expensive on average. And how about this? A last-minute booking up to 30 times more expensive. Supermarkets are not displaying prices as clearly as they should, preventing shoppers from finding the best deals. That's the findings of the Competition and Market Authority, which says retailers could be hampering people's ability to compare products. The watchdog is warning supermarkets to make necessary changes or risk facing enforcement, and is calling on the government to tighten the laws around pricing display. The EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, says Russia is responsible for causing a major global food crisis. On Monday, Moscow withdrew from the grain deal, which guaranteed the safe passage of Ukrainian shipments through the Black Sea. Russia has subsequently bombed storage facilities in Odessa and other port cities, and global wheat prices have soared following Russia's threat to view ships bound for Ukraine as potential military targets. 2 people have been killed in a shooting in Auckland in New Zealand. It took place just hours before the Women's World Cup got underway there. 6 other people, including police, have been injured. The gunman is also dead. The shooting took place on a building site in the downtown area of the city. New Zealand's Prime Minister says the threat level hasn't changed and the football tournament will proceed as scheduled. A minute's silence was held before the opening match of the tournament. New Zealand beat Norway 1-0. 5 whale sharks have been rescued by divers after they were found trapped in fishing nets in ocean waters off Indonesia. Some underwater footage can show how the divers pulled away the nets and gently guided the whale sharks in the right direction so they were able to swim freely. Look at that, majestic animals. Huge as well. The whale shark is considered the largest species of fish in existence. It is on the red list of the International Union for Conservation of Nature as a vulnerable species. Great news that. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, hospital consultants earning on average £128,000 a year. They've gone on strike today and it's row over pay, causing massive disruption again across the NHS.
So this is consultants and dentists. They're staging a 48-hour walkout which threatens to bring planned procedures to a standstill.
We're going to bring in journalist Rebecca Reid as well as David Maddox, who is the political editor of Express Online. Good morning to you both. Rebecca, how much sympathy do you think people will have for these highly paid consultants going on strike?
I mean, I think it's a slightly leading question, the highly paid bit, and I think that is
well, they are highly paid
for a lot of people. They are not earning a small amount of money, especially compared to some of the other people who have been on strike, for instance, nurses. So I do understand why people's knee-jerk reaction is to be like, you earn loads of money, what's your problem? But the reality is these are some of the most highly skilled people in the country doing some of the most important work in the country. And if they were working abroad in any other country, they would be earning 3, 4, 5 times more than they are here. And also there are specific other concerns that they have, for instance, around pensions, and I think to do with conditions. So it's not just about that headline. And I think it's very convenient for the government to be able to be like, this one's not on us, they're just greedy, they just want more money, when in reality there is more to it.
But there is more to it, because of course if they were working abroad they wouldn't be working in an NHS funded by the taxpayer.
Yes, that's true. They're working in a variety of different systems, and there's a reason that they make so much. In America, you know, where you could be earning $1 million a year easily in that role, it is a different funding system. I do recognise that, and I think they do as well. But there is something between where they are now, where their pay hasn't necessarily been fairly reviewed or adjusted over the last 5-10 years, and earning £1 million a year.
David, do you think that the public are losing sympathy with doctors? We appreciate them. As Rebecca said, they are incredibly highly trained. They study for years for these jobs. When your family are ill, that is when you realise how much we appreciate them. But the NHS waiting lists have never been longer, and all these strikes do at this time is extend those waiting lists and cause delays for people who are poorly.
I think most people are outraged by it, actually, especially the consultants. They are highly paid. They have gold-plated pensions. They've got improved gold-plated pensions thanks to the government's recent changes. And, you know, there's no real excuse here. I was texted by a close friend last Thursday who is in a state of despair because he may well have cancer. He's had his biopsy cancelled 3 times because money-grubbing doctors who want a pay rise, who are already very well paid, are going on strike. And these are the people who are really suffering. It's not doctors who actually have good salaries, good pensions, things which most people in this country would love to have.
Are they just money-grabbing, Rebecca, as David says?
I don't think I've ever heard someone say the word money-grabbing doctor before. It's such an oxymoron. Like, if you're a money-grabbing person and you are highly skilled and very clever, the last thing you would do is be an NHS doctor. I think the idea that anybody goes into medicine to make money in this country is sort of quite funny almost. And, you know, the junior doctors who have been on strike much more really don't earn much money, and it's not a particularly lucrative career. So I don't think that anybody is out there training to be in medicine because they want to make bank. I just don't think that's what anybody's doing.
But Rebecca, it was widely reported when these consultants said they would go on strike that when they're not working for the NHS, they will actually be working in the private sector, earning vast amounts of money, while the NHS waiting list, which they're not working on, gets longer.
I mean, it's not vast amounts of money, and it is in their own time. So whatever you want to do as your side hustle, as the Gen Zs would have it, is completely up to you, whether that is to go jogging or whether it's to do surgery. But also that does take some pressure out of this. Them working more hours takes some pressure out of the system. I don't think anybody in this country is pretending that the NHS is running perfectly. And a world in which you can get your hip replaced within 6 months if you can pay for it, and it's 6 years if you can't, is not a fair or a good one. But I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be able to use their spare time, but that does mean they're working a much longer week, and especially when you get to the point where you're sort of pre-retirement, that's tiring. That's a lot to put somebody through.
David, are you feeling sorry for these consultants, this life that Rebecca is painting for them?
Well, you know, I guess it's a tough life on the golf course for them, and their, you know, the expensive holidays that they can afford, and all the rest of it. You know, no, I don't, and I think it's absolutely disgraceful that they've gone on strike. I think for people who will suffer, I mean, I'll give you another story. A friend of mine, because of doctors' strikes, missed 2 heart operations. It resulted in her having a major heart attack, the fall broke her spine. This is the sort of result of what the doctors are doing, and they are deliberately putting people's lives and health at risk to get more money when they earn well above the national average, well above the national average. They can earn well into 6 figures. And, there's no real excuse for this, I'm afraid, at a time when, public finances are under massive pressure. Those who actually are well paid need to take the hit, as many of us are, actually.
Presumably in this example, this didn't have, it's very, very unusual for consultants to go on strike. So in these examples, and I'm so sorry for your friend, that is awful, but presumably that wasn't a result of the consultants being on strike.
That was the result of the junior doctors being on strike. So
the junior doctors don't get paid 6 figures.
The consultants are going to make this just worse, aren't they? I mean, this is the result of the various health strikes. Junior doctors, the nurses as well, and now the consultants. It's just going to make matters worse. I mean, those are just 2 stories. Those are 2 I know of. There'll be thousands of people like this.
The nurses get paid.
I repeat, money-grubbing doctors, and wanting to cash in on a dwindling public pot of funds.
I don't think we could reasonably suggest that nurses in this country are money grabbing. The idea,
I didn't say money grabbing nurses. I said money grabbing doctors.
Work, the hours they clock, the amount of steps they do in a day. The idea that they're money grabbing feels like a really genuine.
I have to say, I think this whole strikes have put a lie to the fact that they are there for public service, frankly, and it's an absolute outrage that it's been carrying on. The nurses have at least seen sense and made a deal, and we had a bit more sympathy for the nurses, I have to be honest, but there is no excuse for what the doctors are doing, and it is an absolute national disgrace, and they should be called out for it at every opportunity.
And Rebecca, can I ask you, do you really think the junior doctors should be given a 35% pay rise, which is what they're striking over?
But they haven't had a pay rise for what? It's the best.
Well, no, I'm asking you a question. Do you think they should be given a 35% pay rise? You do?
I 100% do, yes.
Right. And who pays for that? That comes out of the public purse?
Yes, I'm very comfortable with that.
Right. OK. So that's taxes going up even more?
I'm comfortable with that.
Right.
I feel like, but also, if we stopped wasting so much money in so many, many, many directions, there would probably be more money to spend on this. But
David?
really, the backbone of your country is the health of the people who live there. The NHS needs to be massively overhauled. Nobody is suggesting otherwise. But the people who keep people well and healthy in this country should be a top priority.
Right. Okay. Well, you're not going to get that out of the Labour Party, by the way, because we're probably going to almost certainly get a new government next year. They're not offering them 35%.
I know, and I am sad about that, but I don't think they would have had a situation where over the course of pretty much 10 years, nobody would have had a significant or proper pay rise, because they are effectively earning almost less than they were 10 years ago now. Not quite, but that's hyperbole. But they are not being suitably remunerated, and I'm disappointed the Labour Party doesn't want to address that.
Rebecca, let me just ask you one question. When you say about the waste, I think we all agree there is a sort of a kind of general profligacy amongst government sometimes, which drives us all crazy. But where would you trim that waste from? Do you have any idea which departments you think are particularly wasteful, where you would want to have some funds redirected from towards the NHS?
I mean, my views on this very rarely go down well, but I would get rid of Trident. I would say that we could have a considerably reduced army. I would defund the police. I think there's a lot of places.
I think you've just lost the room there, defunding the police, Rebecca. Defunding the police, right? That's a good idea.
What would you put instead of the police? Like, how would you defund the police?
So police abolition is about the idea that at the moment the police are broadly speaking sort of social workers with truncheons, and they're expected to do about 45 different things, all of which they're badly trained to do. So by not having that, you would basically reinvest towards health and social care. So if you tackled addiction, for instance, which is like one of the biggest drivers for crime, then you don't need to have as many people doing the sort of policing that we're familiar with. So it's about kind of addressing, and prison abolition is much the same. I also believe in
and so if somebody burgles my house, who's going to investigate it?
At the moment, no one. You'll call.
Well, no, you're defunding the police. There'd be no police to investigate it,
Right,
Rebecca.
at the moment, no one.
There's no police. There's no police in your brave new world.
Right now, that's the same thing. Right now, if you get burgled and you call the Met, they'll be like, yeah, that sucks for you, bye.
Thank you, though.
Wow.
Great debate. Thank you, guys.
David Maddox is lost for words, unusually. Rebecca Reid, thank you for joining us. David Maddox, political editor of the Express Online. Well, she didn't just lose the room, she lost the country.
Yeah, but I like to have those conversations. I like to think that we need to come up with different visual images for how we can make this work. That's why I wanted to ask her about which department she would... I didn't expect Rebecca to say she'd defund the police. That took me by surprise.
I'd start with the international aid budget. Yeah. We're giving money to India. Do you know that? We're giving money to India, which is developing its own space programme.
We have to spend our international aid more cleverly. I do. But I don't think we can disband it because, do you know why? I've been thinking about this a lot, funnily enough. Do you know who we interviewed the other day? We were talking about migration. Oh, I know. One of our, I think it was Hardeep Singh Bang, Harjap Singh Bang, the lawyer, immigration lawyer. And he was saying that the problem with so many immigrants here is because there are so many countries which are in a mess overseas, that's why people want to leave them. And I think that's quite a strong argument for increasing our international aid budget, help fix those countries, and then we help, possibly, with the immigration.
If India needs money, they should stop spending it on a space programme.
Yeah, I mean, that's ridiculous. We shouldn't be helping countries that have got a space programme. Right.
Are Britons the laziest people in Europe? We're going to be speaking to the broadcast and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford, who will tell us what she thinks. I'm not lazy.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 11:23. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now, have you ever noticed that either you or someone close to you nowadays are so easily influenced by what's on the telly, radio or social media?
Well, our next guest says it's important for us to understand its impacts and learn how to resist its influence. So, here she is, co-author of Free Your Mind. Good morning, Laura Dodsworth. How easily are we influenced?
Oh, we are influenced very easily. You know, we're herd animals. We have certain inbuilt biases, social conformity. You know, we want to be liked. We also want to be right. We're also inbuilt to respect authority. There's the authority bias. And fear. You know, manipulators play on our secret desires and fears. I can give you an example of myself being scammed, which is quite funny. I was recalling it on the way in today. Do you remember in lockdown there was this tweet that went viral about Woolworths returning to the high street?
I think
yeah,
I do
it totally
remember
got
that.
me. It totally got me. I retweeted it. And you'll find propaganda or scams often play upon fears and hopes. These are the steam in our emotional engine, and they then depress your rational brain.
So this was playing on your hope that it was coming back.
It played on my hope because, of course, it was this really awful, gloomy time. The high street was dying. Lockdown was killing the high street. We weren't going out. And so it played on this nostalgia of childhood pick-and-mix sweets and records.
Yeah.
And then other people tweeting, oh, this is a scam. Look at all the idiots who've been taken in. I was really shamed. You know, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So this book is all about how you spot the scams before they even happen to you.
So the book that you wrote before this was State of Fear, which was inspired by the pandemic and how the government weaponised fear in the pandemic. So how does this then follow on from that? And just remind us a little bit more about what that book involved.
Well, I'm really glad you asked me, because the thing is, that time for me was a really big epiphany. It was kind of a political awakening, and I had a strong sense of freedom being quite illusory. You know, it was natural for people to be frightened of a pandemic, especially for people who were vulnerable to it. Of course it was. But that fear was put on steroids by a very deliberate campaign of behavioural science, nudging, propaganda and fear, in order to induce a certain level of docility and compliance with what were very draconian rules. Now, some people argue that's justified. The head of the nudge unit still says it's justified.
And that's a government unit, the Behavioural Insights Unit. It's called the Nudge Unit.
Yeah, it was at the time a government unit. It's now independent, so by Nesta. But, you know, the head of the nudge unit even said a couple of weeks ago in an interview with The Telegraph, it's justified to frighten people if they are wrongly calibrated. And this really comes to the heart of it. You see, we don't normally talk about calibration when it comes to human beings. We normally calibrate little bits of machinery to make them work properly. So that was very much a kind of the state we're in book. And I find a lot of books these days are like that. You know, old civilization's in decline, democracy's crumbling, woe is us. And you read it and you think, goodness, I agree with every word, but now what do we do about it?
Yeah.
And at the end of State of Fear, I realised there's literally no government white knight. They're not going to tell you about how you're manipulated because they do it too.
Yeah.
So if you want to be an individual, if you want to control your own mind, you need to understand how various people, you know, from the waiter who asks you still or sparkling to the car salesman to the government propagandist to the big brands, how they do it. Now, ultimately, no man is an island, as John Donne said. We're all involved in humankind. You can no more avoid manipulation than an island can avoid being lapped by the waves, but you can learn to recognise techniques. Gives you immunity. In a way, this book is like a vaccine against manipulation.
What is a classic technique?
Oh, goodness me, which one shall I start
with?
OK, so right now you'll see there's a lot about climate in the weather. And there are various techniques being used there. So first of all, there are images everywhere of things on fire. This is because there's something called the truthiness effect with pictures. Yes, that's a real scientific term, I'll have you know. Yes, so pictures and videos have a bigger emotional impact on us than words. If you want to make your decision in a cool state, read about it. Don't look at pictures. So they're using pictures. They're also using salience. They're using numbers. So they'll say it's predicted to be 48 degrees. It may never get to 48 degrees, but they've put the number in your head because it's a pretty standout number.
So now we think climate change, global warming.
And also, it's non-stop. Now, this is something called the truth illusory effect. you may start off sceptical. By the time you've seen your 50th picture of a car on fire or scorched wasteland after a wildfire, which is supposedly due to a heat wave, you start believing it's true.
Yeah.
And maybe you will cancel your holiday because you think it's too hot in Turkey.
And it's not as though sort of the media deny this is happening. There was a collaboration, wasn't there, between Sky Television and the Behavioural Insights team that they were doing press releases about a few years ago, before the pandemic.
2021, the Nudge Unit, which was then one-third owned by the government, and Sky, a licensed broadcaster, produced a report called The Power of TV. And the whole premise of it is how to use TV to socially engineer people to decarbonise their lifestyles to comply with net zero, which is a not uncontentious policy. Now,
what was the broadcaster doing conspiring with the Nudge Unit?
It's an admission of social engineering, that's the thing. I actually complained about it at the time with Toby Young, the chairman of the Free Speech Union, and the complaint wasn't upheld because the way Ofcom works is they're a retrospective regulator. But you can see the effects, you can see how Sky has turned out. But it wasn't just Sky, it was 11 major broadcasters. So it's from the lurid weather maps to the sedimenting of climate information in every type of programming, from children's programming to even recommended product placement. What better way to wash your brain than a soap, Beverly? Yeah. So during COP26, all of the major soap operas in the UK had converging storylines.
Did they
Characters
really?
swapped over,
Did
they cross-referenced
really?
each other. Now,
I
these
never watched
soaps,
these wretched things.
well, they're normally in competition.
Yeah.
So when they actually collaborate...
So it's like operating like a cartel.
It is like a cartel. I tell you what, there are examples in this book of invitations to conferences to encourage COVID-19 vaccine uptake. And you may well say, well, that's great, they should have been doing it. But I spoke to a Hollywood scriptwriter who said, it's a step too far. It's not my job to be encouraging people to have medical interventions. I'm supposed to be writing great stories.
Yeah.
This kind of thing goes on behind the scenes a lot. I mean, a classic example was Top Gun. I love Top Gun.
Oh, yeah.
But don't think Top Gun was just a bit of fun. That was also really the final rehabilitation for the US Army after Vietnam. It did wonders for Army recruitment. You know, they had access to all of the planes, the military personnel. That's why it's such an exciting film.
And with the climate nudging that's going on, Laura, who's got the vested interest? Like, they would say, well, that's lovely that these media outlets are doing this because they're trying to save the planet. Is it just as simple as that? Is it the executives at Sky TV sit around and they say, we have to take a moral stance and save the planet, so we're going to collaborate with the Behavioural Insights team to make people change their behaviour?
Well, they do. I mean, I think there's a bit of a club of people who are probably, you know, genuinely really well-meaning, and they probably really believe everything they're trying to push. I don't get involved in the kind of the science side of climate. What I'm interested in is the behavioural science side. Yeah. It's the fact that they're trying to change your behaviour by frightening you. I don't agree with that. Look, we are vulnerable to biases, conformity, authority and fear. But the hope lies within. I think it lies within humanity because we're also ingenious. We're fountains of creativity and we're individuals. And our brains are brilliant. They're wondrous, they're miraculous, and they should be free. So those people may have the best intentions, but I don't agree with their methods. I don't agree with manipulating people unwittingly.
Because I don't think generally that people are stupid.
No, fascinating.
They're not.
We have to let you go, but here's the book. It's rather good. Free Your Mind, The New World of Manipulation and How to Resist It, by the fabulous Laura Dodsworth.
Thank you.
And Patrick Fagan.
Good luck with it.
Really interesting.
Right. Still to come. Are Brits the laziest people in Europe? According to one survey, we certainly are, as we want to work more and more from home. We don't have that luxury, do we?
No, we do not.
This is GB News, Britain's newsroom.
And it's just after 11:30. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. Voting has started in 3 by-elections taking place in England today. All 3 seats in Uxbridge and South Ruislip in London, Selby and Ainsty in North Yorkshire, and Somerton and Frome in Somerset have been held by the Conservatives since the last general election. Polling stations close at 10 p.m. with results expected to come in on Friday morning. You'll have to bring photo ID with you if you want to vote. Thousands of medical appointments and operations have been postponed as senior doctors strike for 48 hours over pay. Consultants and dentists have agreed to offer emergency care only, and it comes just 2 days after junior doctors held a 5-day strike, the longest in the history of the NHS. Health Secretary Steve Barclay says the government have listened to the BMA's demands.
Average NHS earnings of a consultant after this pay rise will be £134,000 a year. And on top of that, 20% of their salary goes into their pension, which means they'll be able to earn, when they retire by the age of 65, tax-free up to £60,000 a year. The number one ask of the BMA was for pension tax reform, and we listened to that ask, we acted on it, and in addition we've also accepted in full the independent pay review body recommendations.
Well, further misery on the trains this morning. Passengers facing disruption as RMT members launch fresh strikes. It's the first of 3 days of industrial action. The other 2 days are the 22nd and 29th of July. It affects 14 train companies in England and may have an effect in Scotland and Wales too. Some areas will have no services at all. Others will be running at a reduced service. Supermarkets aren't displaying prices as clearly as they ought to, preventing shoppers from finding the best deals. The Competition and Markets Authority has found retailers could be hampering people's ability to compare products. The watchdog is warning supermarkets to make the changes or risk facing enforcement action. They've also called on the government to tighten up the laws around pricing displays. And more on our stories available on our website. That's gbnews.com. I'll be back in about half an hour's time. And now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And we'll be right with Andrew and Bev after today's finance report. The pound will buy you $1.2910 and €1.1518. The price of gold is £1,535.95 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,642 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for physical investment.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good morning. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It is a fairly pleasant and sunny start to the day for many of us. Good amount of sunshine, and some of us will hold on to that sunshine throughout the day as well. But do keep the umbrella on hand, because we will start to see some showers bubbling up quite widely across the UK. They could turn on the sharp side in places. Most persistently across parts of Shetland up into north-east Scotland, where it will also remain relatively breezy. But elsewhere, with light winds, it should feel pleasant in that sunshine, highs between 18 and 24 degrees Celsius. Into this evening, those showers will gradually fade their way out, and many of us will see some clear intervals developing and hold on to some of those clear skies overnight as well. Touch more cloud pushing across Northern Ireland into parts of southern Scotland, northern England, but particularly where you hold on to those clearer skies, temperatures will drop down to around 10 degrees Celsius in cities, even into single figures in some rural areas. We start off Friday then, again, still with some sunshine around, but perhaps cloudier for that central slice through there. And then increasingly into the afternoon, we could start to see some of those showers push further south as well. Always Shetland and the far north-east of Scotland staying that bit breezier and generally cloudier. Temperatures perhaps a smidgen down compared to Thursday, but still relatively pleasant, around 18 to 21 degrees Celsius. Do make the most of the sunshine that you've got over the next couple of days, though, because this area of low pressure is moving its way in for the weekend. Going to bring a spell of much more widely wet and windy weather. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Read my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's 11:40. You're with Britain's News on GB News with Andrew Bismuth-Turner, and the panel are here. Of course, Carol Malone, and Fritz of the Daily Express, Sam Lister. What about Nigel Farage? What did you think of that interview?
I thought it was fascinating. I thought particularly your question about IUC.
Yeah.
And he was a bit hesitant on that, and I'm not really sure why, because if I was him, I'd just go for it. I mean,
we've all written stories. We've all had threatening letters about defamation. That is defamatory.
I think he was hesitant because he doesn't want to say too much in case he decides to sue them. But it is astonishing and more than sinister that a bank can cancel you, because when you take your bank account away, you're a non-person. You might as well not exist. When they do that, they can do that on the basis of what you think about Brexit. It's interesting that there was a woman that handled his account who was an avowed Brexiteer, who had said publicly she was an avowed Brexiteer. And Nigel had said that every time he spoke to her, she was a bit sniffy. She was a little bit snotty about everything. But, you know, if I had my money in Coutts, of course, I'm not rich enough to be in Coutts, but if I was, which I also think is a terrible rule, but anyway, if I was, I would take all my money out of there. How dare they judge you and judge what you think and what you feel and what you vote and how you see things politically? I mean, how dare they?
Well, this is what Nigel said to us earlier. Nigel Farage talking to us earlier. He is coming. Apparently. Are you going to sue them?
I don't know yet, Andrew. Right now, my real focus right now is to get this debate out as broadly as possible, to get people to understand that subject access requests exist, and please to use them. And I'm going to urge the government and the Treasury Select Committee to act.
Sam, he's been around a long time in public life, and he's had a lot of terrible things said about him and written about him. that is a man who's hurt.
Yeah,
I think he really is hurt.
Because, I mean, it's incredibly brutal. The assessment of him is incredibly brutal. For a bank to be making those kind of moral judgments on somebody is shocking.
Saying he's homophobic.
Yeah, and I think, you know, he would be well within his rights to take legal action. I think the broader point, though, is when did banks start becoming political organisations?
Yeah.
And I think, actually, I mean, if I was a banking chief now, you know, we're in a capitalist society. There are obviously a lot of people in this country who did vote Brexit, 52%. Yeah. There's a big proportion of the population who obviously aren't acceptable to some banks. I would be saying, look, we're the bank for the silent majority. Come and bank with us.
Do you know what I'd like to see them print a list of all the accounts they have with other politicians. I'd like to know who they are, and I'd like to know what organisations they're signed out to, what countries have business with them that are not democratic countries. It would be just interesting to see where their values actually are. But I mean, I do find it astonishing because Sam just alluded to it there. They called him a xenophobic, they called him a racist, and they said he was a grifter. I mean, my God, if anyone's a grifter in this world, look to our banks. You know, if anyone's kind of, you know, not looking after us and playing, you know, playing underhand tricks, it's the banks these days. But, you know, what is going to happen? We should repeat that thing again, shouldn't we? This thing he said we could all take action if we thought it had happened to us. It's called the subject access request. Subject access request. I mean, that we can all do that.
Which he didn't even know existed.
Which he didn't. If he doesn't know, God
did any of us
rest
know?
I've done a subject access request to the government, and they have a report on me for what I was saying during the pandemic.
Wow, is that true?
So this story about Nigel doesn't actually shock me because I've been on the receiving end of quite a lot of this abuse for the last 3 years in terms of your opinion not fitting the overall counter-narrative. I mean, particularly, I'd said about the fact that there was some evidence emerging about the effect of the COVID vaccines on menstrual cycles, which has since been confirmed that those changes are signalled. But of course, even if the science changes, the fact that I was saying it then, that meant I was a person of interest to the government because I was saying things that were medically accurate, but against the narrative.
It filters down, doesn't it, Bev? It's interesting that even if you're in the media, and even if you're not particularly controversial, I tried to get a house insurance with NFU Mutual, OK, who say we insure everybody. They said no, and I said, why? And they said, because you're a famous person. I said, well, I'm not actually. I'm a working journalist who's on telly every now and again. And they said, no, on that basis that we won't have you because you're a risk. I mean, how dare they? Because you know, I appear on telly every now and again. They won't insure me. So it filters down. It's filtering down through a lot of organisations.
And what other organisations are doing it? That's what we don't know.
It's about ESG, though, isn't it? This environmental social governance. It's about every single organisation having to be nice, having to be kind, having to buy into, because there are league tables of companies and where they sit in this ESG system. It's a very corporate necessity.
It's the vested interest, isn't it? It's like Stonewall, for example, asking organisations to pay them money, and then they will put them in a league table of who's the most kind of LGBT friendly. You know, it's vested interests are kind of gripping these organisations. But actually, you know, what about most people? Most people want to bank. Just give you the money and we'll take the money out.
Look after our money properly.
And what happened about ordinary common sense? Because that's what's happening here. This is part of this culture war, isn't it? That this Tory government should get to grips with it, because it's a huge vote. The country are crying out for common sense here.
And it is, you know, actually we have had a Conservative government for, you know, 13 years. And how have they allowed the kind of left-wing groups to hijack
But that's how they've allowed, because the left-wing groups have gone in via the corporations, not via the government. That's how they've done it. We've got to read this statement, I'm afraid. Sorry. We do have to do this. Coutts aren't here to defend themselves. We don't want to get into trouble, and we have to say it is not Coutts' policy to close customer accounts solely on the basis of legally held political and personal
abuse. That's their statement, and I think it's ridiculous. That's my view.
You just negated the statement.
I think it's ridiculous, and I don't believe it. I think Nigel Farage was cancelled because of his views on Brexit. Primarily 84 times it was mentioned.
But isn't it interesting, Piers, that I said earlier that even people who really don't like Nigel Farage...
We need to move on. I'm so sorry, we've got somebody waiting to talk to us. Have we outgrown the need for going into the office, or are we just getting lazy? Brits now work more hours remotely than almost any other nationality, according to the survey.
British employees spend an average of 1.5 days per week working from the comfort of their home or their garden.
So let's speak now to broadcaster and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford. Good morning, Lucy. Always lovely to see you. What might the psychological effects of people working from home be, good and bad?
Well, some of the good, I think, speaks to the way in which more people want to work from home, which is about commuting. So many people find their commute very stressful and very expensive. And in this report, it was identified that Brits are working from home more and would actually like to work home more than they do, compared to countries in Europe where the commutes are often much shorter, much cheaper, and people feel a greater sense of community. But I think there is a danger that if you spend too much working from home, spend up too much time, and obviously I'm speaking to you from my home, so it's a bit difficult for me to say this, that actually people miss out on the interaction and the soft power of being around colleagues, the informal trading of information, the different skills that you might get if you're just starting out in your career that you can observe in the colleagues around you. And I think we have to be careful in saying, yes, there were some really great things that came out of the shift in working patterns as a result of the pandemic, which resulted in more people working from home. But I think we also need to recognise people can be more lonely. They can miss out on promotions. They can miss out on the general chatter that's going on around best practice within the workplace. And also they can just end up feeling stuck in a silo, and that there's something really quite fluid about working with your colleagues that we're missing out on at our peril.
You miss the gossip by the water distributor, don't you? And the gossip by the photocopier.
Yeah, I think there is a really big dimension to that, is that actually having some gossip on a WhatsApp just really doesn't cut it through. But it isn't just about the gossip, it's about working out what's happening within your workplace. Who are the people that you need to talk to? Who are the people who are best to avoid? And what's the best practice? What changes and what thoughts are people having about the way in which the world of work works within your own workplace? We miss out on that, but also just normal social interaction. But I stress again, for a lot of people, they feel more productive, they feel more in control of their work life, which they don't particularly if they have a very long commute and they have a very long working day. And also they can have a better work-life balance. So swings and roundabouts. It's really hard to identify which is best for some and best for other people, but I always think it should be a hybrid.
OK, thank you, Lucy. Good to see you, broadcaster and psychotherapist there, Lucy Beresford. Sam, let's talk about you work in an office, partly at home. Does it work for everybody? I think it might be generational.
Possibly, but I think, I mean, certainly the job I do, I couldn't do it from home. I mean, occasionally I work from home, but really, the whole point of politics is it's about interaction.
You want to see the MPs.
Yeah.
See them in Portcullis House, wandering around corridors.
You pick up so much just from wandering around, you know, rather than actually formally meeting people or whatever. It's actually the people you bump into on the way to the meeting that actually, that's where things happen. I mean, but that's not the case for everybody. I do get that, and I think actually, I would say, you know, women with young children, mainly the childcare does fall to them, and I can see a case for people in that scenario who want to be at home.
It's interesting. It's interesting.
You work from home a lot, though, don't you?
Yeah, there was a poll last year, and it was of Gen Z, people aged between 18 and 34, and they said, interestingly, they said where they worked from. Half worked from their bed, from sitting on their bed, half worked from the sofa. But interestingly, after a year, most of them said it was exciting at first, but they were actually missing the buzz, and they admitted they were less productive. Yeah. And I think people are. I mean, I think production in this country is a problem, and I think we have something like 30-odd% of people still working from home. In places like Italy, it's 12%. In other, I think Australia, it's 3%, and their productivity is way higher than ours. You know,
we brought our entire newspapers out, of course, in the pandemic from home. There was one person.
It wasn't good. It wasn't good though.
But it wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
You were having Zoom meetings. Yeah. You can't have the same interaction and gossip and conversations.
We got them out, but it was not the same products that it would be in normal times.
We just want to bring you a little bit of breaking news on the banking story that we've been talking about all morning. So, BBC correspondent John Sopel, a man I know, he has just tweeted this. He says, "Dear Nigel, always believed when I get things wrong, I own up to it. I got it wrong. Sorry, that will teach me to trust reporting of my old employer. He's not BBC anymore, is he? He's global. No. If your political views were even part of the reason why the account was suspended from Coutts, that is totally reprehensible. from John.
Quite right, John Sopel, because
he's taken advice there.
Yeah, because it's been pointed out in a lot of newspapers that he mocked Nigel Farage
completely
for suggesting that he'd lost his. He took the BBC line that he hadn't got enough money in his bank account.
And now he's blaming the BBC, not himself.
That was quite pointed, actually, wasn't it?
Yeah,
my former employer.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah.
That's a very belated mea culpa.
Take responsibility for your own comments.
Yeah.
Now,
I think there'll be a few other people doing that as of today in the next couple of days, won't they?
Yes.
Backpedaling a little bit. And because the trouble is, Nigel is such a controversial figure that it's too easy. It's too easy to jump into a pylon, isn't it? And when the facts emerge, hopefully people will be apologising.
We should talk about Just Stop Oil, shouldn't we?
Yes, why not?
Because we can't stand them. Well, I can't stand them. I can't stand them alone.
We should get that. We should get that lad back on that you had on a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, the one who talked about boiling in your sweat.
Boiling in your own sweat.
Just stop boil.
79 people died. So who's starting? Okay, I'll start. Okay, I mean, this was a guy in the street yesterday. There was a pregnant lady driving her car. Because of all the chaos, she had a little bit of a crash and she jumped out of the car, clearly distressed, and saying, "Can you stop all of this?" Of course, Just Stop Oil ignored her. And the guy in the car were there, then jumped out of the car and attacked it was a guy called Noor, wasn't it? David Noor.
He's the bloke who was hauled out.
He's the bloke who was hauled. Yeah. So and it wasn't good to watch. I mean, this guy kicked him, smacked him, punched him, whatever, and he was on the ground. Later, this guy is saying, he doesn't hold any malice. Daniel Noor, he's called 21. Daniel Noor said he doesn't hold any malice against the guy, but then, God knows what effect this has had on the pregnant lady. She was distressed, she was upset, she was crying and shouting. You don't know what this could have done to her, but this was always going to happen, and it's going to keep happening until the cops start doing their job and drag this lot off the streets.
Yeah. But it was always going to happen, though, wasn't it?
People's patience have snapped.
I think this is the problem, and actually, these people they think they've got good on their side, right on their side. They think they're protected.
Sanctimonious.
Yeah, and actually, people are people. If you're in a stressful situation, if you've got a pregnant woman in the car and you're in this stressful situation, people don't necessarily always keep control of their emotions and anger. And so, of course, this was going to happen. And Robert Goodwill, the Conservative MP, he says, essentially, the public's reached the end of the tether with it. And I think that's a very fair assessment. And I think these people do need to be conscious of the fact that, it's actually really quite a horrible video and nobody would condone.
Do you know what was really shocking? They're now in trouble with the Jewish community because they actually tried to compare oil bosses to the Nazi architects of the Holocaust, which is shocking. I mean, shocking.
Carol Malone, by the way, is going to be with me in the studio next week.
I'm off
Monday,
next week.
Tuesday, Wednesday, because Beth's not in Monday, Tuesday,
Carol will be here.
You're going to be my co-conspirator.
The thing is, you're working that autocue, and I can't do it, and he can't do it, so God knows what's going to happen.
It'll be a delight. We're looking forward to it.
Coming up next, though, is the live desk with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson. We'll be back with Britain's Newsroom next week. Have a lovely weekend.
See you then.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
Hello there, good morning. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It is a fairly pleasant and sunny start to the day for many of us. Good amount of sunshine, and some of us will hold on to that sunshine throughout the day as well. But do keep the umbrella on hand because we will start to see some showers bubbling up quite widely across the UK. They could turn on the sharp side in places. Most persistently across parts of Shetland up to North East Scotland, where it will also remain relatively breezy. But elsewhere, with light winds, it should feel pleasant in that sunshine, highs between 18 and 24 degrees Celsius. Into this evening, those showers will gradually fade their way out, and many of us will see some clear intervals developing and hold on to some of those clear skies overnight as well. Touch more cloud pushing across Northern Ireland into parts of southern Scotland, northern England, but particularly where you hold on to those clearer skies, temperatures will drop down to around 10 degrees Celsius in cities, even into single figures in some rural areas. We start off Friday then, again, still with some sunshine around, but perhaps cloudier for that central slice through there. And then increasingly into the afternoon, we could start to see some of those showers push further south as well. Always Shetland and the far north east of Scotland staying that bit breezier and generally cloudier. Temperatures perhaps a smidgen down compared to Thursday, but still relatively pleasant, around 18 to 21 degrees Celsius. Do make the most of the sunshine that you've got over the next couple of days, though, because this area of low pressure is moving its way in for the weekend. Going to bring a spell of much more widely wet and windy weather. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join